the elders of this fine congregation for putting on a lectureship such as this. They've been doing it for a number of years. We were blessed a few years ago to be a part of it. And for many years we came and we assembled and we listened to the messages that were delivered by the speakers, and we were blessed thereby. We appreciate also Brother Davis, as he has mentioned, 44 years ago. That's a long time. That's a very long time. And he was indeed our minister, one that we loved then and we love and appreciate now for his stand of the truth. And not only that, for all of the wisdom that he has imparted to us over the years. Preaching the gospel, there have been many, many, many pitfalls. And of course, having one such as he to call and to talk about these things has been a great blessing to me. And then, of course, the doors that he's opened up for us. And y'all allow me this time, it needs saying, I think. I believe in giving a person their flowers while they are alive. Brother Davis have opened many doors for me. I've been all over the West Coast, Texas, Oklahoma, California, and I mean all over those states because of Brother Maurice Davis Sr. And I appreciate that so very much. Now, the lesson that has been assigned me is identifying the doctrine of Christ with respect to the weekly contribution. Now, this is a very serious lesson. Yes, and in case you doubt the seriousness of it, before we begin to talk about what the New Testament has to say relative to it, I want to read some of the mindsets that are among us, members of the Church of Christ, with respect to our giving to the Lord. And I think then you will clearly understand why a lesson of this nature is needed. Yes. I'm going to be quoting directly, and I'm going to give you the place where you can find these quotes, these statements, and then you will know. I'm going to be quoting from Dwayne Winrow, the minister of the Reseda Boulevard Church in Los Angeles, California. And he writes that it is a binding responsibility on Christians today to tithe. Now listen to him as he goes through this. He says both forms of giving represents opportunities of spiritual growth. The tithe is described as giving to the Lord the first fruits, quote unquote, of all our increase. And he quotes Proverbs 3 and verse number 9. He said, it is returning to God the first complete portion of our income as a literal representation of all he has given to us in accordance with the law of proportion as mentioned in 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2. Now notice now, unless you missed it, he's saying that 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2 is a right or charge to tithe, is what he's saying. Now he goes on, he says, tithing, and get this, is a transconventional practice of righteous giving. A transconventional practice of righteous giving. The principle related to this practice is learned from each of the three biblical dispensations, patriarchal, mosaical, and of course the Christian. He says, while some are skeptical of using the term tithe for fear of being indicted for imposing a legal code on New Testament believers, most acknowledge the tithe as a benchmark for Christian giving. He says tithing, like all other New Testament imperatives, he says, are not requirements for achieving righteousness. They are standards that enable us to practice the righteousness of God through faith, and he cites Romans chapter 8 and verse number 4. He says tithing is literally giving our income back to God for the bestowal of his blessing upon it. The purpose of tithing is to acknowledge God as the source of our livelihood. The principle of tithing is that faithful stewardship of material, that is little things, grant access to spiritual treasures. And he cites Luke chapter 16, verse 10 through 12. He goes on, he says, tithing not only grants access to the heavenly realm, called the windows of heaven, but the practice of which protests our income from the devourer. And he cites Malachi 3 and verse 10. Now he says, as an offering is anything that, is anything that one gives beyond what is required of them by the imperatives of saving faith. Tithing in worship. I better say that again, Brother Bob. Tithing in worship is presenting oneself to God in terms of returning the first complete portion of our time, talents, and treasure. Free will offerings is the act of sanctifying a gift of our time, talent, and or treasure that we have the full right to possess. If I understand this correctly, he's saying tithing is a part of worship. Now look at this. Free will offerings is also considered a form of giving. He said through which we make investment with God. It is in this form of giving in which the principles of sowing and reaping are applicable. 2 Corinthians 9:6. For this reason, believers are encouraged to approach opportunities to give free will offerings with an attitude of cheerfulness and joy. Now, while he cites a good passage on the cheerfulness and the joy in our giving, he's wrong about tithing, and I'm going to show that, being the New Testament pattern of giving today, or one of the New Testament prerequisites for giving. Amen. All right, he says the purpose of tithing as an act of worship is to demonstrate the righteousness of saving faith. Now, you're contradicting yourself back here, man. Because you just said that tithing is not a requirement to bring about righteousness. But now you say that the purpose of tithing as an act of worship is to demonstrate the righteousness of saving faith. And he quotes Hebrews 11 and verse number 4. Brethren, this is a real problem. That's right. The identifying of the collection on the first week is a necessary thing. He goes on. He gets deeper with this thing. He says, whereas the purpose of free will offerings is to demonstrate in contrast the sincerity of our love. Now, he's right about that in 2 Corinthians 8 and verse 8. He's absolutely correct. But then he says, the church must provide believers, and get this, with both avenues of giving. In each worship service, a believer is challenged to demonstrate the righteousness of their faith through obedient giving that can rightfully be described as giving a tithe. Our giving is nothing more than giving a tithe. He said, and to respond to opportunities to prosper and increase their stewardship through free will giving. 2 Corinthians 9, verses 6 through 7. Now, I think you can see that Dwayne Renroe is messed up. Yes. And I'm going to show that. But now, I want to get one more fella in here. And it's not going to take long to show God's system of giving today. But I want you to understand the problem that we're facing is real. Yes. is not a joke, and it's creeping and has creeped into the churches of Christ. Dwayne Winrow is a preacher in the church of Christ. Now look at this now. Another one, and I want you to look at him too, because he has written a book, and his name is Richard Barclay. He has a workbook. Now, don't be looking at me. Ephesians 5:11, we're to have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. And how are we going to reprove them if we don't call names? And some of y'all are going to these congregations, you're embracing these people, and you don't understand that they are nothing but false teachers. Now, I know we're hurting today economically, but faith in God will see us through. Look at what Barclay says. And to me, he says nothing different than does Dwayne Winrow. Now notice what he says. He says, if church members tithe, and they must tithe for it, and I'm on page 8 of his workbook. He says, if church members tithe, and they must tithe, for the tithe is mandatory, there would be enough in the storehouse to do all we have to do in terms of ministry. Some argue that tithe is in the Old Testament. This may be true. However, we should speak well of his sacrifice, of his life for us. But all that stuff in the Old Testament is a picture of what we ought to have in the new.